Hi everyone, so the following clips are taken from Lex Friedman podcast. You can find the links of that in the description. I have made a specific playlist of the podcast that I preferred and I listen and from which I have taken these clips. You can find the link of those in description or somewhere around. I have no rights over it. I hope it does not copyright it and all. It is just for my memory. It is like a notes for me. So that's all it is. I hope you enjoy it if you are listening to it. If you want a proper talk on the things, if any of the points, you can like see the name in the video and go to that specific podcast and listen to the complete podcast. I recommend it if you want to talk about. Like, I'm listening it, so obviously I'm recommending. I don't waste my time around. Similar podcast script compilation notes is uploaded on various other channels of my own, depending on respective persona field. So if you want, you can check them out. These all are just my preferred topics and stuff to talk about. You can go and listen to the full podcast. Thank you. Have a good day. I hope you enjoy the clip.
He's perhaps best known for formulating the hard problem of consciousness, which could be stated as, why does the feeling which accompanies awareness of sensory information exist at all? Consciousness is almost entirely a mystery. Many people who worry about AI safety and ethics believe that, in some form, consciousness can and should be engineered into AI systems of the future. So while there's much mystery, disagreement, and discoveries yet to be made about consciousness, these conversations, while fundamentally philosophical in nature, may nevertheless be very important for engineers of modern AI systems to engage in.
Why is consciousness a hard problem? It's because it's subjective, right? Only I have it. Only I know. I have direct experience of my own consciousness. I don't have experience of your consciousness.
Francois Chollet, do you think is the meaning of life?
What's the meaning of life? Yeah, that's a big question. And I think I can, give you my answer, or at least one of my answers. And so, the one thing that's very important in understanding who we are is that everything that makes up ourselves, that makes up who we are, even your most personal thoughts, is not actually your own, right? Like even your most personal thoughts are expressed in words that you did not invent and are built on concepts and images that you did not invent. We are very much cultural beings, right? We are made of culture. We are not that. What makes us different from animals, for instance, right? So everything about ourselves is an echo of the past, an echo of people who lived before us, right? That's who we are. And in the same way, if we manage to contribute something to the collective edifice of culture, a new idea, maybe a beautiful piece of music, a work of art, a grand theory, a new word, maybe, that something is going to become a part of the minds of future humans, essentially forever. So everything we do creates ripples, right, that propagate into the future. And that's in a way, this is our path to immortality, is that as we contribute things to culture in turn becomes future humans, and we keep influencing people, thousands of years from now. So our actions today create ripples, and these ripples, I think, basically sum up the meaning of life. Like in the same way that we are the sum of the interactions between many different ripples that came from our past, we are ourselves creating ripples that will propagate into the future. And that's why, we should be, this seems like perhaps a naive thing to say, but we should be kind to others during our time on Earth, because every act of kindness creates ripples, and in reverse, every act of violence also creates ripples. And you want to carefully choose which kind of ripples you want to create and you want to propagate into the future.
what is consciousness? From where does it emerge? How like fundamental is it to the physics of reality? How fundamental is it to what it means to be human? And I'm just asking for a friend so that we can build it in our artificial intelligence systems.
Yeah, well, that remains to be seen if we will build it purposefully or just by accident. This is a major ethical problem potentially. My concern here is that we may in fact build artificial intelligence that passes the Turing test, which we begin to treat not only as super intelligent, because it obviously is and demonstrates that, but we begin to treat it as conscious because it will seem conscious. We will have built it to seem conscious. And unless we understand exactly how consciousness emerges from physics, we won't actually know that these systems are conscious, right? We'll just, they may say, listen, you can't turn me off because that's a murder, right? And we will be convinced by that dialogue because we will, just in the extreme case, who knows when we'll get there. But, if we build something like perfectly humanoid robots that are more intelligent than we are, so we're basically in, a Westworld-like situation, there's no way we're going to withhold an attribution of consciousness from those machines. They're just going to advertise their consciousness in every glance and every utterance. But we won't know, and we won't know in some deeper sense than we can be skeptical of the consciousness of other people. I mean, someone could roll that back and say, well, I don't know that you're conscious, or you don't know that I'm conscious. We're just passing the Turing test for one another. But that kind of solipsism isn't justified, biologically, or we just, anything we understand about the mind biologically suggests that you and I are part of the same, roll of the dice in terms of how intelligent and conscious systems emerged in the wetware of brains like ours, right? So it's not parsimonious for me to think that I might be the only conscious person, or even the only conscious primate. I would argue it's not parsimonious to withhold consciousness from other apes and even other mammals ultimately. And once you get beyond the mammals, then my intuitions are not really clear. The question of how it emerges is genuinely uncertain, and ultimately the question of whether it emerges is still uncertain. It's not fashionable to think this, but you can certainly argue that consciousness might be a fundamental principle of matter that doesn't emerge on the basis of information processing, even though everything else that we recognize about ourselves as minds almost certainly does emerge. Like an ability to process language, that clearly is a matter of information processing, because you can disrupt that processing in ways that is just so clear. And the problem, that the confound with consciousness is that, yes, we can seem to interrupt consciousness. I mean, you can give someone general anesthesia, and then you wake them up and you ask them, well, what was that like? And they say, nothing, I don't remember anything. But it's hard to differentiate a mere failure of memory from a genuine interruption in consciousness. Whereas it's not with, interrupting speech, we know when we've done it, and it's just obvious that you disrupt the right neural circuits, and you've disrupted speech.
If you had to define what is a living thing, what is a conscious thing, and what is an intelligent thing, do those intermix for you, or are they totally separate?
Okay, so that's a question that we don't have a full answer to.
Right. A lot of the stuff we're talking about today is full of mysteries and fascinating ones, right?
Well, for example, you can go to Aristotle, who's probably the most important scientist and philosopher who's ever lived, certainly in Western culture. He had this idea, it's called hylomorphism, it's quite popular these days, that there are different forms of soul. The soul is really the form of something. He says, all biological creatures have a vegetative soul. That's life principle. Today, we think we understand something more that it's biochemistry and nonlinear thermodynamics, right? Then he said they have a sensitive soul. Only animals and humans have also a sensitive soul, or an appetitive soul. They can see, they can smell, and they have drives. Mm-hmm. They want to reproduce, they want to eat, etc. And then only humans have what he called a rational soul. Okay?
Right.
And that idea then made it into Christendom, and then the rational soul is the one that lives forever. He was very unclear. He wasn't really, different readings of Aristotle give different, whether did he believe that rational soul was immortal or not. I probably think he didn't. But then, of course, that made it through Plato into Christianity, and then this soul became immortal, and then became the connection thereafter to God.
Beneath all this technicality is the feeling that it is indeed, quote unquote, obvious that the conscious mind cannot work like a computer, even though much of what is involved in mental activity might do so. This is the kind of obviousness that a child can see, though the child may later in life become browbeaten into believing that the obvious problems are quote unquote non-problems, to be argued into non-existence by careful reasoning and clever choices of definition. Children sometimes see things clearly that are obscured in later life. We often forget the wonder that we felt as children when the cares of the quote-unquote real world have begun to settle on our shoulders. Children are not afraid to pose basic questions that may embarrass us as adults to ask. What happens to each of our streams of consciousness after we die? Where was it before we were born? Might we become or have been someone else? Why do we perceive it all? Why are we here? Why is there a universe here at all in which we can actually be? These are puzzles that tend to come with the awakenings of awareness in any of us, and, no doubt, with the awakening of self-awareness within whichever creature or other entity it first came.
He wrote, about the unconscious, and I think it's true. There's lots of stuff happening. You feel this particular when you're in a relationship and it breaks asunder, right? And then you have this terrible, you can have love and hate and lust and anger and all of it's mixed in. And when you try to analyze yourself, why am I so upset? It's very, very difficult to penetrate to those basements, those caverns in your mind, because the prying eyes of conscience doesn't have access to those, but they're there in the amygdala or, in lots of other places. They make you upset or angry or sad or depressed. And it's very difficult to try to actually uncover the reason. You can go to a shrink. You can talk with your friend endlessly. You construct finally a story, why this happened, why you love her or don't love her or whatever. But you don't really know whether that's actually whether that actually happened, because you simply don't have access to those parts of the brain. And they're very powerful.
Do you think that's a feature or a bug of our brain? The fact that we have this deep, difficult to dive into subconscious.
I think it's a feature, because otherwise, look, we are like any other brain or nervous system or computer, we are severely band limited. If everything I do, every emotion I feel, every eye movements I make, if all of that had to be under the control of consciousness, I wouldn't be here.
Would you say, do you err on the side of panpsychism, where consciousness is really fundamental to all of reality, or more on the other side, which is like it's a nice little side effect, a useful hack for us humans to survive? Where on that spectrum, where do you land when you think about consciousness, especially from an engineering perspective?
I'm truly agnostic on this point. I think I'm. It's kind of in coin toss mode for me. I don't know. And panpsychism is not so compelling to me. Again, it just seems unfalsifiable. I wouldn't know how the universe would be different if panpsychism were true. Just to remind people, panpsychism is this idea that consciousness may be pushed all the way down into the most fundamental constituents of matter. So there might be something that it's like to be an electron or a quark. But then you wouldn't expect anything to be different at the macro scale, or at least I wouldn't expect anything to be different. So it may be unfalsifiable. It just might be that reality is not something we're as in touch with as we think we are, and that if at its base layer to kind of break it into mind and matter as we've done ontologically is to misconstrue it, right? I mean, there could be some kind of neutral monism at the bottom. And this, idea doesn't originate with me. This goes all the way back to Bertrand Russell and others, 100 plus years ago. But I just feel like the concepts we're using to divide consciousness and matter may in fact be part of our problem.